Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Hello, Salt Strong Nation. Joe Simons, like diamonds, back again. And we have a special guest, someone who has made the appearance on this podcast and in all kinds of videos over the years. I don't know how many times you've been on the podcast, but it's been quite a few. Captain Dylan Hubbard, Hubbard's Marina. What's up, brother?
What's going on, man? Thanks for having me back. Look forward to chatting.
This is the thinnest and strongest I've ever seen you on our podcast. So congratulations. It's really cool to watch that journey of it. Yeah. And I love the fact you've documented and at least from what I've seen, inspired quite a few others to get there and hit the gym and shed some pounds and be your best version of yourself. It's awesome.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. It's definitely been a little bit of a journey, and the whole document and part of it was doing a little bit more and then kind of backed off a little bit recently. But it's a product of just trying to help other people out, right? And it's helped me a lot. So I know hopefully it helps others as well. But I mean, yep. You're one to talk. Some of the guys on your team doing the same thing. I mean, you got Nick over there, who's a beast, and a lot of the coaches doing their thing.
Yeah, Nick and Tony, they make us all look good. So,
yeah, Tony's been hard at it for a long time.
Yeah,
his powerlifting is very inspirational.
Yes, beast mode. Well, we're here to talk about grouper. There has been a lot of discussion. There's been some numbers that didn't make sense with, the amount of supposed catches from the Skyway Bridge and things like that. And, social media was kind of lit up here recently with some of the proposed regulations, but there's also, there's also, I believe, some good news that's come out of this as well. When anglers get vocal and actually, go to meetings, voice their opinions, actually not just on social media, but, following the rules. Because I saw that there was 200 comments on that one post. And one of the guys who's he's like, we can't count this until you actually email or go to this link and submit. And so it was cool to see that kind of turn around. So what's taking a step back? What's happened? For those that don't know what's going on with grouper regulations, what's happened and where are we today?
That was a lot. So that was a huge T. So now I'm going to run with that. But one thing you hit on that I want to make sure that I emphasize is that point about going to meetings or speaking up or having your voice heard, because this was historic. This was groundbreaking. This was the first ever time that the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, NOAA Fisheries, and NOAA Office of Science and Technology had such an outpouring of recreational fishermen in such a short amount of time. Literally record-breaking the number of private recreational comments that happened in such a short amount of time. And that is 100% thankful to the Salt Strong community and to folks out there who were willing to take a few extra steps. And I have to say, it's a product of COVID, right? So one of the positive things that changed in the fishery management and science aspects from COVID was the ability to participate in these meetings more virtually, more remote. The problem that private recreational fishermen face is it's really hard to get to these meetings. Myself, making a living, this is my industry, this is the way I feed my family. I take the time to take off work, to drive to these meetings, to fly to these meetings, to buy the hotel rooms, because obviously it's my way of life. So it's a little bit different for me. The average Joe angler who's in the Salt Strong community, who's trying to go fishing 1, 2, 3 days a week, might not have that ability or that option. But now, thanks to the changes in fisheries science and management because of COVID, now you can participate in these meetings remotely. So if that's just looking on the Salt Strong community, maybe reading a post that I made about an upcoming meeting and this upcoming contentious item, and then going onto the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council website and submitting a comment virtually. You don't have to attend the meeting. You don't have to look at anything. You can literally just read something, and instead of commenting on social media alone, take an extra step and comment through their website, and that can make a change. We saw it make a change. We saw the dramatic effect that it had. We had 355 comments submitted in 48 hours or less, all from private recreational anglers, all on the gag grouper comments, and it dramatically changed the outcome, altered the course of history, if you will. So pretty awesome.
It is awesome.
Yeah,
so what? Tell us what happened for those that are still in like what? Or tell me what happened here.
Yeah. So what happened was Gag Grouper essentially had a stock assessment. So the way science and management works is science occurs, and then the science body, the science appointment of the council, the Science and Statistical Committee, goes over that science information. Then they transmit their opinions and kind of their outcomes of the assessment process of their conversations to the council. The council makes regulations. They forward those regulations to NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries makes the ultimate regulations and kind of manages the fishery. So what happened with Gag Grouper is it came around time to do a stock assessment. That stock assessment concluded in 2021, and they used information. The terminal year of that stock assessment was 2019. So these stock assessment processes are very, very long-winded. They take a lot of time. They have a lot of open meetings to the public. The federal system, the way it's structured, is they have to publicly notice meetings in the Federal Register. So if you and I wanted to sit down and talk about Gag Grouper, we have to publish that meeting and publicly register that meeting so the public can be involved. So we have to do a notice. We have to write a notice. Someone has to publish a notice. The notice has to be published in the Federal Register. It has to be a 30-day wait. It's a very long-winded process, and it slows the process down. So the more open and transparent it is, the slower it goes. And that's part of the issue we have with these stock assessments is there's a lot of data inputs that need to happen. And that means a lot of people have to come together and kind of compile information. And that takes a long time. And then these meetings have to be noticed. And there's a lot of steps. And those noticed meetings kind of drag things out. Then once the stock assessment concludes and the process is over, then that information has to be submitted to the SSC, or the Science and Statistical Committee, which is an advisory panel, a scientific advisory panel to the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council that is appointed by the council to digest that scientific information. Because I don't know if you have read a stock assessment report, or if you listening have seen one. They're generally between 400 to 600 pages long, and they have like so much scientific, technical information. I feel like I have somewhat of a handle on things, but when I start to read a stock assessment report, I get completely lost. I've never made it more than a few pages. It's just so hard to understand. So that's what the SSC does. Is these are academic folks. These are experts in the industry, in the field, and they're appointed by the Gulf Council to take that information, synthesize it, communicate about it, discuss it, and then transmit that to the council. And by federal law, by the MSA, Magnuson-Stevens Act, that governs federal fisheries, the Science and Statistical Committee must set an overfishing limit. And then also they set an ABC, an allowable biological catch. So that's their job, is to set that OFL and ABC. And then they submit that information to the council, and the council is then charged to make an ACL, or allowable catch limit. And that's how they manage the fishery. They transmit that information to NOAA, and NOAA uses the ACL to manage the fishery. But what happens is with these OFLs, that overfishing limit, let's boil it down and make it easy math, because I'm not a mathematician. That OFL, let's say it's 100 pounds. Then the SSC will set that ABC, or allowable biological catch, lower than the OFL by a buffer. And that buffer is for scientific uncertainty. So if your ACL is 100 pounds, they might ask the council to set, or they might set that ABC to 80 pounds because there's a 20% buffer in there for scientific uncertainty. So that's a big challenge that we face with these buffers for uncertainty. And then once they set the OFL and they buffer the ABC down for scientific uncertainty, the council then comes in and sets an ACL, and that ACL can be set lower than the ABC. And that buffer is for management uncertainty. And then in some situations, they'll even set another buffer for an allowable catch target, or ACT, which is another buffer down. So in many situations, like for red snapper right now, our OFL is like almost 20 million pounds, but our allowable catch limit's like 14 or 16 million pounds. So there's literally 4 to 5 million pounds of fish that are lost, that are not able to be caught because of scientific and management uncertainties. So that is a challenge in and of itself. And there's some ways that they're trying to combat that. But with gag grouper, the big challenge that we faced was the data they're using is from a 2021 stock assessment with a terminal year of data of 2019. That is old. It is 2024, and we're being managed based on data from 2019. So that is 5 years in the past. So fishermen, you and I, folks on the Skyway, folks fishing Tampa Bay, folks fishing the Gulf of Mexico, anywhere, even the Northern Gulf, even off of Destin, Panama City, they're saying, hey, there's a lot more gags out here than what you guys are saying. They're saying gags are overfished and undergoing overfishing. But if you go out there, the population is a lot better than it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. The grouper fishery in general, red grouper, gag grouper, very cyclical. We've seen these cyclical upturns and downturns, and they have a very boom bust recruitment cycle where you have really big years of recruitment. All of a sudden you have a bunch of baby gag grouper. They get bigger. They enter the fishery. We have a lot of gag grouper to catch. And all of a sudden they have a bad recruitment year, a couple bad recruitment years. And then all of a sudden you see that downturn. So that's very typical historically of gag grouper. And that's basically what happened is the stock assessment caught a bad year and showed bad situation. Now we've had a couple good years. The gag group are really coming back well, and we're stuck down here, and we really need to get back up. And it takes time. And the challenge on top of that is what we face with this data. So that's how we got where we are. Where last year they were talking about super short seasons, super small catch limits, super restrictive seasons. We went from a 6-month gag grouper season open in June 1st all the way through the end of the year to all of a sudden now we're going to open September 1st. We're only going to be open for a short amount of time until I think it was supposed to be November 11th last year. But then last minute they announced, hey, we're actually going to close it even earlier. We're going to close October 19th. So our 2023 season that was already abbreviated got abbreviated even more. And so we had this super short season, and everybody was angry when that season got closed early. I was too. It was super costly as a business owner. It was super frustrating as a recreational fisherman. But I was trying to be positive when that occurred. And I was telling everybody, hey, if they close it early, there's a couple things that can happen. If they close it early and we didn't overrun the quota, next year's season is going to be longer. If they closed it early and we met the quota specifically, at least we didn't have an overage. There's no paybacks. Next year, we're going to have a very similar season. If they closed it early and we overran the quota like they were scared we might have, we're in a big pickle because with gag grouper specifically, there's regulations in place that have what's called an AM or an accountability measure. And that accountability measure is when the fishery is considered overfished, any quota overage must be paid back the following year. So in our earlier example, overfishing limits 100 pounds, the OFL is 100 pounds, the ABC or allowable biological catch is 80 pounds because there's that 20% buffer for scientific uncertainty. The SSC submits that to the council. The council comes in and sets the ACL at 70 pounds. There's a 10% buffer there for management uncertainty. So now we have a quota based on 70 pounds. We open the season, we fish, and let's say we have we ended up catching 100 pounds. That's what the landings say. So we overran that quota by 30 pounds. The following year, if catch levels stay the same, we're supposed to catch 70 pounds again, but we overran at 30 pounds last year. That means our catch level is really 40 pounds. So that's where I was very concerned that we're going to have this huge overage or any overage, and that's going to shorten an already abbreviated season. So we're all scared about this.
Yeah.
Fast forward to a few weeks back, and we get into January, late January. That's when that data was supposed to be coming out, that wave 5 data from September and October to show us what those gag grouper landings were. Well, I started making phone calls because normally what happens is the wave ends, takes about a month for them to do QA, QC, or quality assurance, quality control of the data. And then they publish the data because it's public record. They publish it on their website. The data wasn't getting published. And I was like, we're kind of at that time frame. We should be seeing this data. So I started making some phone calls, started asking around, couldn't get any information. And I happened to be sitting next to someone in a meeting who will remain unnamed, but is pretty high up in the federal government. And I saw an email come across. I didn't see any details of the email, but I saw the headline of the email. And it insinuated that something was not right. It was something was afoot. So I started making some more phone calls and was informed that, yes, there is a huge problem, and I will learn more at the Gulf Council meeting. And they, like a week before the Gulf Council meeting that occurred at the end of January in New Orleans, they published the information to the Gulf Council website. They published this slide deck, and I can send you the link. It's amazing. And the slide deck, the presentation was actually created by the Southeast Regional Office of NOAA Fisheries. Andy Strelchek is a regional administrator, and he's the one who used that presentation, talked about it at the council meeting, and really made some huge concessions, groundbreaking concessions, historic, really, based on the public comments. And it showed essentially what you alluded to earlier. Was it showed the landings information from MRIP. MRIP is our Marine Recreational Intercept Program. That's how they recreational data landings for our federal water and nationwide. MRIP is a nationwide program. As you go, that's how they get landings information for federal waters. And basically, it showed how they got the information for gag grouper, and there was an unacceptable number of intercepts. There's 32 intercepts total. There was 16 for the charters, 15 for private rec, and there was one for shore-based anglers. And they have attached to these landings numbers what's called a PSC. PSC is the percent standard error, and it's basically, for statisticians out there, they know what I'm talking about. For fishermen like me, I still have to kind of look things up every now and again. But essentially what it is the higher the PSE, that means basically the more unsure they are if that's a real good number. And the rule of thumb nationally, and hopefully you're sitting down. The rule of thumb in MREP is a PSE, a 30% PSE or less is acceptable. So basically, if we're 30% sure that we're wrong, that's good. If we're more than 30% sure we're wrong, that's not good. That's when we start to have challenge. If we're more than 50% sure that we're not right, that's when they start, all right, maybe we should throw this information out. Well, the one number that really made its way around social media that really pissed people off was that shore-based intercept. There was one shore-based intercept that showed essentially 106,000 pounds of fish. The whole quota for gag grouper was like less than 400,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So because of one person had one gag grouper on the Skyway, it was extrapolated to mean 106,000 pounds of fish were caught from shore. And the PSC number, you ready for this? The PSC number in that presentation was 98%. So they were 98% sure that that's total crap and that's not true. And that number is wrong. And essentially what came out of the council meeting is they're going to pretty much ignore that. So that's huge. All of a sudden, you take 100,000 pounds off. That was 25% of the quota that was overshot. The quota was like 400,000 pounds. They were basically saying we had landed somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.7 million pounds. So back to my earlier example with the paybacks, if we overran the quota 4 or 5 times, that means for 4 or 5 years, we would not have a gag grouper season at all. That's some dramatic news. So when I first saw this information, when I first saw the presentation and I saw that we overran the quota 4 or 5 times, I was like sick to my stomach. I was like, what? We're not going to be able to fish for gags for 5 years. What are we going to do? This is terrible. And I went to that council meeting really, really, really kind of disenfranchised and upset and kind of like the system's broken. What are we going to do? Leaving the council meeting, feeling really good, because the good news here, the positive news of all of this is we are most likely going to have a decent gag grouper season in 2024, despite this information. The NOAA Fisheries historically has presented us with MREP data that has been questionable in the past. We've had some big errors like this, exactly like this in the past, and we've been told that's the numbers, deal with it. In 2005, I was pretty young at the time, but we had multiple hurricanes. We had gas was like $5 or $6, or I think it was like $4 or $5 a gallon. It was a really bad year for us in Central West and Southwest Florida, where a majority of the grouper are caught. But we were told that like millions of pounds of fish were caught and we overran the quota, and they shut down the fishery. They totally closed the fishery based on some MREP data that was kind of questionable. It didn't make any sense with gas being so high, with hurricanes so prolific that year. There was no way we could have caught that many fish. But that was the numbers, and we were kind of told to deal with it. Fast forward to today, the same thing happens where these numbers don't make sense. Everybody's crying that there's no way this is possible. And NOAA Fisheries has heard us, has listened, and now they're starting to make adjustments. So I think it took almost 20 years that happened in 2005, and it's been a long road, but they're starting to, the federal government, nothing happens fast. We're starting to see some movement. And I think that is 100% thanks to private recreational fishermen and the folks who are willing to get educated, to listen to podcasts like this, and to take a few minutes and submit a public comment. It changed the game. And I think we can continue working together and utilizing the strong network that Salt Strong has to continue to make positive change in this fishery. So I think that answered your question.
Yeah, that was awesome. One question that bothers me with all this, let's just use your earlier example of 100 to keep simple numbers. So you got 100, you got a buffer, another buffer, maybe even a third buffer. So let's just say it's 2. So it went from 100 to 80 because of some uncertainty. I get it. And then to 70 for another level of uncertainty buffer. And then they discover after the season shut down that it was actually at 100, right? So it was right on that original number, and yet we're now penalized. Mm-hmm. Like you would think the buffer is there. Does that make sense? What I'm hearing you say is if it truly came out at 100, we're now penalized because you're like, to me, that's like, cool, we hit it on the dot. Why are we penalized the next year for hitting the original number? Like that's what the buffer was there for in the first place.
So if you exceed the overfishing limit, it is bad news bears. But if you exceed the ACL, there's paybacks in place. So it depends on the fishery. So there's other fisheries, like, for example, red grouper. We overran the quota. This I think would make it the 4th year in a row, according to the numbers, that we overran the quota. But because red grouper isn't considered overfished, overrunning the ACL doesn't mean anything. There's no payback trigger because the fishery isn't considered overfished. Mm-hmm. So for red grouper, we have the same problem that we had with gag grouper in wave 4 of MREP data. MREP comes in 2-month waves. So January, February is wave 1, March, April is wave 2, May, June is wave 3, so on and so forth. Wave 4, July and August data came out for red grouper. And essentially, the first 6 months of the year, we had caught 60% of the quota, and red grouper closed July 19th. So 6 months it took to catch 60% of the quota. We had 40% of the quota left on the table. We only had 19 more days. So I'm waiting for wave 4 to come out. I'm all excited. I'm like, there's no way we caught 40% of the quota in 19 days. It took us 6 months to catch 60% of the quota. They're going to announce an extension to our red grouper fishery. I'm excited at the end of 2023, like October of 2023. I'm looking forward to another couple of weeks to fish red grouper. Well, the numbers came out and they said we caught 1.4 million pounds of red grouper on wave 4, 70% of the quota in 19 days. So it took us 6 months to catch 60%, but according to the numbers, it took us only 19 days to catch 70% more of the quota. Ended up overfishing the quota by 30%. And it was not great. Definitely frustrating. And that information didn't make the rounds on social media. And we went into the October council meeting knowing this, and how many private recreational anglers commented on the red grouper issue at the meeting?
0.
One.
Okay.
One. Me. Because I was there. So it was a super big challenge, and it was super eye-opening to me, because that's where we were with gags. And now we're staring down the barrel of a shortened red grouper fishery. Now with gags, we're staring down the barrel of not fishing for them for 5 years. And luckily, Ed Walker was appointed to the council. And between Ed Walker, myself, and the Salt Strong community, we were able to really get some people's eyes opened, and the outreach and the education and the outpouring of support. And for gag grouper, when we get into that January council meeting, we saw all those comments, 355 in 48 hours, and it changed the game. So
that's awesome.
It was pretty cool. But to answer your question earlier about why is there a payback, or why are we penalized when we kind of hit that number on the head, is because of the way MSA is structured. So for certain species, you have accountability measures based on regulations, but basically MSA, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, was enacted in 1976 to manage our federal fisheries. And over the years, it's been reauthorized, 1997 and 2006 were the two reauthorizations of MSA. And in 2006, it started to be reauthorized. It was finally done in 2007. That reauthorization added in a lot of conservation metrics. The accountability measures, the buffers, the ACL requirements, that was all added into MSA in 2006, 2007, in that reauthorization. And those things are the roadmap, the guidelines, the confines that the federal fisheries managers have to stay between. So when you say, why are we penalized for hitting that number on the head? It's because MSA. You have to stay within those guidelines, and it dictates if you overrun the ACL and there's an accountability measure in place, you got to do it. No matter, even if it's a situation. So a lot of you guys listening to this podcast might be familiar with what's going on in the South Atlantic. The South Atlantic red snapper situation is a challenge. Mm-hmm. They're literally talking about in the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council about a bottom fishing season because of the issues that they're having with MSA and the fishery over there. It's basically, they are running into a challenge where the quota for red snapper is so small because overfishing is occurring, and the paybacks and the accountability measures keep getting that season shorter and shorter and shorter, that quota lower and lower and lower. And then now the quota's to a point where it's so low, you go out fishing for mutton snapper or grouper, you're going to catch a red snapper occasionally. You're going to unhook that fish and throw it back because it's closed. That's called discard, a regulatory discard. The season was not open, so regulations dictated you discarded that fish. So a regulatory discard occurred. Unfortunately, a certain percentage of discarded fish, discard mortality, is applied in the stock assessment process. So when they come about our landings, when they have a fishery, let's say red snapper in the Gulf is open in June and July for most of the states. let's just say it's open June and July. So red snapper's open 2 months of the year. Well, in January, they'll show landings for red snapper. And the reason why there's landings in January is because people went out fishing for other fish. They caught a red snapper, they threw it back. And a certain percentage of those regulatory discards are considered dead due to dead discard mortality. So discard mortality applies to all the fish that are caught and released. So essentially in the South Atlantic, the quota is so small that everybody goes out there and fishes for other fish, even though the season's not open.
Mm-hmm.
Those discards, those dead discard numbers are overrunning the quota. So you're caught in this feedback loop, this negative feedback loop of the quota is so small, you're overrunning the quota because you're fishing for other fish and discarding red snapper. Then the quota gets even smaller. The next year you hit it again or overrun it again because of the discards. So now the quota has just gone to nothing. And that's the problem they face in the South Atlantic is they continue to be stuck in that same feedback loop. And MSA dictates you overran the quota, even though the managers are like, dude, we didn't overrun the quota. We didn't even fish for the fish. But because the discard numbers, because of the way the system is set up, you're caught in this loop. So what they're doing over there is they spend a lot of money to do this red snapper count, and they're hoping the science will say, hey, there's more fish out there. It's going to enable us to increase the quota and kind of end around the MSA challenge. The other thing they're doing is talking about bottom fishing seasons. And so what that would do is that would end regulatory discards, because if they said during the months of October, I'm making this up totally, so no one freak out. But during the months of October, November, December, you're not allowed to fish, bottom fish at all. All of a sudden, there's no discard mortality because no one's allowed to bottom fish at all.
Mm-hmm.
Just access is gone. So that would solve the problem, but that's kind of scary too, right? Oh, because we're worried about a few trout that you release dying, we're just going to totally not allow you to fish for redfish, snook, or anything. Can't even fish for pinfish, because you might catch a trout. You might have to discard it. It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous precedent.
Yes. That's wild. Yeah. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that there's these booms and busts all the time, because it's crazy. Right. And what's also puzzling is that you mentioned in the very beginning of the podcast that they're essentially using 5-year-old data for a lot of these decisions, yet miraculously they're able to tell you exactly how many fish you caught last year, right? So it's like, that's so frustrating.
What you talked about is two things. So you talked about the science part of it, and you talked about how they know what you caught, right? The one interesting thing that is kind of being talked about that will help the boom bust situation and the cyclicalness of some of our fisheries is this new approach. MSA, the guidelines I talked about were set up originally in 1976 to keep foreign fleets out of our domestic fishery. We had Russians, we had Taiwanese, Japanese, we had people coming in, Mexicans fishing in the Gulf, taking our domestic fish. So the idea with MSA was to keep foreign fishing fleets out of our domestic waters. Then over the years, it was used to manage commercial fisheries, because commercial fisheries back in the 60s, when Hubbard's Marina started in 1928, when we started, it was rowboats with cane poles. We fished on the beach. It wasn't until the 1946 that we had our first combustible motor in our charter vessel. And in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you went out there wasn't recreational fishermen on the water. It was all mostly commercial and charter. And then in the 90s, you started to see the recreational fishermen, the outboard engines, the proliferations of awesome companies like Saltstrong. It makes it easier to get out there. And technology has really revolutionized it. So now there's more recreational fishermen on the water. The problem is MSA, again, was kind of set up to do these things, and the guidelines are here, and now recreational fishermen are stuck in between these guidelines, and they're trying to figure out inventive ways. And there are some positive things on the horizon that are coming slowly that are going to help address some of these issues. And one of them is the multi-year ACL approach. So instead of trying to manage the fishery and keep it within these confines each year, it would be a more multi-year approach. So you could go up and down, but as long as you stay within those bigger guidelines, you're not going to have these boom busts. And that will help a lot, but that's kind of forthcoming. And it's a challenge to set up, and the council hasn't really moved forward with tackling that one, but that's on the table. There's also this recreational fisheries initiative that the council is trying to tackle. It was kind of proposed by NOAA Fisheries Southeast Regional Administrator Andy Strelchek, and it's this huge project that they're going to undertake. They're using IRA funds for it, the Inflation Reduction Act funds. Basically, they're going to spend like $6 million on trying to come up with inventive ways to manage the recreational fleet and try to prevent some of these challenges that are uniquely recreational. But the thing you mentioned is why are we using data from 5 years ago? A huge challenge that we face in our area, in our region, the Southeast region shares one science center with 3 councils. So there's 8 regional councils set up to manage the federal waters of the nation. You have the New England Council, the Mid-Atlantic Council, the South Atlantic Council, the Caribbean Council, the Gulf Council, the West Pacific, you have the North Pacific, and you have the Pacific Council. The Pacific Council, which is like Washington State and California, Oregon, the Pacific Council has 3 science centers for their one council. Because when MSA was established, the guy who helped establish MSA was from that region. So he made sure a lot of funds were dedicated over there, right? The Southeast region, where we're at, is unique. We are the only region, or not the only, but we deal with the most stakeholder conflict, because go up to the North Pacific Council, which is Alaska. How many recreational fishermen are going out fishing in Alaska? Not many. There's not a huge recreational fleet like we have in the Gulf. It's mostly commercial and charter. So their stakeholder conflict is much lower. Whereas in the Southeast region, in the Gulf of Mexico, off the east coast of Florida, in the Caribbean, there's a lot of recreational fishermen, and the stakeholder conflict is greater because the recreational fishermen want to fish a certain way and want a certain season. The commercial fishermen want to fish a certain way and have a certain set of regulations. The charter fishermen, there's a lot more people. There's a lot more angst. And it's a unique challenge to the Southeast. But our science center, the Southeast Fisheries Science Center, which is based in Miami, is responsible for doing all the stock assessments for the South Atlantic Council. That's North Carolina all the way through the south side of the Keys. That they're also responsible for doing all the stock assessments in the Gulf. That's Brownsville, Texas, all the way to the north side of the Keys. And they're also responsible for all the stock assessments that have to happen in the Caribbean. That's Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And they're responsible for highly migratory species, and they're responsible for sharks. So in reality, that stock assessment body that handles all that digests all that science, that synthesizes all of this data, is spread across 5 different councils, whereas other councils have dedicated science centers, multiple dedicated science centers, so they can do stock assessments more frequently. So the Southeast region needs more funding for our science center to be able to do stock assessments more frequently. That's a huge challenge we face. Our entire science budget was spent, that Great American or Great Red Snapper count that people talk about a lot that happened in the Gulf. That was a $12 million project that was authorized by Congress. And it was a 2-year study on one species. The entire survey budget for the entire Southeast Fisheries Science Center is $12 million. And that's for 5 different councils, essentially, with HMS Sharks, the Caribbean, South Atlantic, and the Gulf. So their entire annual budget was blown, survey budget was blown on one species. And it's a huge challenge that we face in the Southeast. And that's a big reason why science lags behind what we're seeing on the water. Is there's just simply not enough funding, not enough people available to tackle the challenges we have and to do them more frequently. So generally with some of our big species, gag grouper, red grouper, amberjack, triggerfish, red snapper, we're doing stock assessments. We're seeing stock assessments every 3 to 5 years. In some cases, 6, 7, 8 years between stock assessments. And other species like Wayne snapper, like queen snapper, like some of these other fish, mangrove snapper, you might get 10 years, 15 years, or some of them have never had a stock assessment. They're considered data poor. So it's a huge challenge that we have in our area and in our region with the limited funding and the fact that our science center is shared between fishery councils. And then as far as trying to figure out exactly what we caught, you really face a big challenge. A lot of people are like, the commercial fishermen are killing our fishery, and it's commercial fishermen's fault. But in reality, if you look at how the commercial fishery is set up and how those commercial anglers have worked with the council and NOAA Fisheries to regulate themselves, their regulation is such and their management is such that their accountability is much higher, because in order to know what is caught on a boat or in a stakeholder group, you have to know a few things. You have to know how many people are fishing. You have to know how many trips they took. You have to know their catch per unit of effort, because when Luke goes fishing compared to your average angler inshore, Luke's catch per unit of effort is going to be higher, because for every unit of effort, every hour he's on the water, he's going to have a higher catch than an average angler, because he's an expert. He's been doing it. That's what he does for a living. He's out there every day. So Luke's catch per unit of effort is going to be different than average Joe angler. So knowing how many trips, how many people are on the water, how many trips they took, their catch per unit of effort, then what they caught and kept and what they caught and discarded. Those are the 5 things that you really need to make fisheries dependent data work. How many people go fishing in the private recreational fleet in the Gulf? No one knows. That number is estimated. How many trips did they take? No one knows. That number is estimated. What's their catch per unit of effort? No one knows. That number is estimated. Landings, discards, all that is estimated. It's not known. Whereas the commercial fleet is under a moratorium on permits. There's 897 permits in the Gulf. So that's how many commercial fishermen can fish. No more than that, ever, in the history of the world. There will never be more than that, because they're under a federal moratorium. But it could be less. So what they do is they do vessel monitoring systems where every vessel has something permanently affixed to the vessel to monitor where the vessel is. Before they go fishing, they have to hail out. Then when they come in, they have to do a 3-hour landing notification to say where I'm coming into. This is what I caught. This is what's on the boat. This is where I'm coming into, so the federal government can come and check their catch. And their vessel monitoring system shows where that vessel is and what their ETA is to the dock as well. Then once they come in, every ounce of fish that comes off that boat is weighed, and a federal dealer has to do a trip ticket. So not only is the fisherman, the captain and crew, weighing the fish and monitoring the fish and submitting what they caught, then a secondary person who's unaffiliated, who's buying the fish from them, has to weigh the fish and report what is caught. So you have checks and balances there. And all these trip tickets and all these different things to make sure every ounce of fish that comes off that boat is monitored and accounted for, and then double accounted for through the trip ticket process. So they know exactly how many people are fishing. They know exactly how many trips they took. They know exactly their catch per unit of effort. They know exactly what was landed. And then what they discarded, a lot of those vessels have voluntary camera systems on board. So they're actually starting to use EM, which is electronic monitoring, which a camera records what is caught and kept, what is caught and released. So they know exactly all 5 of those tenets of the commercial fishery. So a majority of our scientific information comes from the commercial fleet, because there's no guessing, there's no estimation. They know exactly all 5 things for our fishery dependent science. The charter fleet, fast forward over to the charter fleet, we have a moratorium on our permits. So they know exactly how many people are fishing. They also have a pretty good idea of what or how many trips we take, because they have a specific charter for hire MREP program. And that MREP program, the Marine Recreational Intercept Program, specifically geared to charter fishermen, is easier because they know where we dock. They know where we leave from. They know where we return to. And they can send people out and count us, because there's only 1,297 charter boats and party boats in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a finite number of us. They know where we're at, so they can monitor us more closely. So they have an absolute number of how many are fishing. They have a pretty good idea of how many trips we take. We have to report in the every headboat has had to report since 1986 in the Southeast Regional Headboat Survey, SRHS. So they have a pretty good idea of our catch per unit of effort. Because of our mandatory reporting on headboats, they have a pretty good idea of what is caught. They have a pretty good idea of what's discarded because they have what's called port observers. So the state gets money from the feds to put people on our boats. So if you go fishing with us at Hubbard's Marina, often you'll see someone wearing an FWC shirt, taking fish, measuring them, tagging them, releasing them. And what that person is doing is they're paid by the feds through the state to come out and observe what's going on our headboats. And they use that data in the Southeast Regional Headboat Survey to get that catch per unit of effort, to get our landings, to get our discards. So they have an absolute idea in the commercial fleet of all 5 things. They have a pretty good idea in the charter fleet and party boat of most of the 5 things. The recreational fleet, they don't know how many people fish. They don't know how many trips are made. They don't know CPUE or catch per unit of effort, landings or discards. All that's estimated. And it's estimated in very scientific, unique ways. The algorithm, the actual math problem that is used to estimate some of that stuff is 26 pages long. You can actually look it up. It's public information. Yeah. And I'm not a scientist, but a 26-page long math problem is not something that I understand. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That is nuts. But overall, it sounds like you're more optimistic in general, of just that at least they're listening and aware that there is a problem, and maybe that we can't just keep doing things the way we've always done.
Yeah, I think.
Are you 30% more? Right? Are you 30% more that you're sure that you're optimistic?
Right, exactly. I think I have to be optimistic, but also overall, I would say being involved in the process, knowing how the system works, knowing some of the people behind the system, it's not as evil and scary as I thought it was. I mean, what's really ironic is you can finish watching this podcast or listening to this podcast and then Google 3-day red snapper season Salt Strong, and you're going to see myself and you talking on our boat. And I'm just railing the federal process and how they're totally screwing it up. And that video is still on YouTube, and I still watched it occasionally because I was incredibly wrong. And a lot of that information was misled and misguided. And I started attending federal fishery meetings in 2017, and I went through a process called the Marine Recreational Education Program. And I can say, without a doubt, it really opened my eyes and helped me kind of start to learn. And then that really kind of set me down a path of trying to learn how the system works. And then over time, the more I learned, the more I got to know people, the more other people helped me. I've been blessed to be a little bit more effective, because just like anything in life, if you want to be a mechanic and work on your car, if you don't know how this works, if you don't know how the motor comes together, how are you going to be able to work on it, right? So that's what I think has helped me be a little bit more optimistic. And I totally understand other people who are not optimistic, because I was there in 2016. I had a tinfoil hat on pretty tight, and I really thought the system was broken and messed up, and they're out to steal our fish. But there's a lot of really good people working really hard on improving the process. And I think there's a lot of positive things that we can look at. One cool thing is AI. So one of the big things, so you have fisheries dependent science. We talked about that before. You need to know the 5 things for fisheries dependent science. The other thing we didn't talk about was fisheries independent science. Fisheries independent science is just what it says. It's independent of fishermen. It is scientists going out and collecting data, and they do so in a very strategic, rigid manner that's very scientific. So they use the same scientific approach to collect the data. So there's one thing that's called the bottom long line index. They use the same hooks, the same leaders, the same leads, the same tackle methodology, and they use a stratified random statistical sample to stratify randomly sample across the areas of the Gulf of Mexico. The problem that we face is fisheries independent, fisheries dependent. Fisheries dependent science is easy to collect. It's simple. Fishermen are already going out there. All the scientists have to do is go talk to fishermen. So we want to give them the information in many cases. We want to try to help. So fisheries independence or fisheries dependent science, easy to collect, cheap. But the problem is, what happens when Luke and you are out there on the boat and you're not catching fish? You're going to change lures. You're going to change locations. You're going to use lighter tackle. You're going to change your fishing methodology to increase your catch per unit of effort. So that does not give a scientist a good look at the health of the fishery, because the fishery could be declining, but Joe and Luke are just such bad to the bone fishermen that it doesn't matter. They're going to keep catching fish because they know what they're doing, and they're going to keep changing their techniques, and they're going to keep improving their techniques. So even though the fishery is declining, they're still catching fish. So if you're just looking at what they're catching, fishery is doing good. Joe and Luke are still catching fish, but it's because they are working harder, taking them longer. They're changing their methodologies. So it's really important not to have just fisheries dependent science, but also fisheries independent science. And that's why that fisheries independent science uses the same techniques, the same methodologies in these stratified random samples. One of the things they do is camera studies. So they take these cameras. It's really cool. They do it out of FWRI, and they have a couple labs across the Gulf. FWRI is the Florida Wildlife Research Institute in St. Pete. So it's right here in downtown St. Pete in Central West Florida. They drop these cameras, and the cameras have multiple, or the systems have multiple cameras on them, so they can actually measure fish from the video information. So they drop these cameras down, random areas, stratified random sampling across a random temporal time period. So random geographic, random times, and all these different scientific methodologies to be able to tell how many fish are in the Gulf of Mexico, literally counting fish, watching the video, counting fish, measuring fish. So it provides a lot of information, and there's tons of cameras being dropped all over the Gulf. The problem is some scientist has to sit there and watch it, synthesize that information, count those fish, process that footage. And a lot of times they're 2, 3, 4 years behind. And let's say 5 research vessels are out there dropping cameras every day for a 6-month research trip. They come back from that 6-month research trip. The data is already 6 months old. Then it takes someone 3, 4 years to watch only portions, because it's stratified random sampling of recorded video footage. But then you have 100 hours of video footage, and you guys edit videos all the time. Imagine trying to edit 100 hours, hundreds of hours of video. You couldn't. You have to break it down and choose certain parts. And how do you choose certain parts? They just randomly stratified random sampling. They pull out certain parts and look at certain parts. The beauty is AI is now being used to try to improve the way that data is synthesized, speed up the synthesization. I don't think that's a word, but speed up the way that data is processed. So that way, when they come back from a research trip, instead of taking that 6-month-old data from that 6-month research trip and sending it to some scientists to take 3 years to only watch maybe 5% of the whole video data, they will be able to come back to shore, and the computers on the ship have already processed all that information, and they're able to just hit a button, and all of a sudden real-time science is being relayed. So our fisheries independent science would literally increase exponentially overnight. And they're very close to finalizing. They've already been able to use AI to identify red snapper and a few other species. Now they're trying to make sure it can identify all the species. And it will also increase our electronic monitoring. So like I talked about earlier, the cameras on the commercial boats, the cameras will be able to tell the fisherman if the fish coming up is legal or not. So imagine as a fisherman, you're reeling a fish up and a camera spits out information. Hey, you've got an illegal out of season fish coming up. And now all of a sudden, as you're reeling up, you already have your dehooking tool. You already have your venting tool. You're ready to, as soon as that fish breaks water, to get them off the hook and get rebaited and get back down there.
Wow.
Your efficiency increases, because now you're not taking as much time. You have more time with bait in the water. So you're more efficient of a fisherman, and you're making sure that those discarded fish are going to be healthier.
That's
so
wild.
There's a lot of things that AI are going to improve. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Cool.
That is.
So there are positive things.
Well, yeah, man, this has been really helpful. I think I learned a lot, and I'm sure other people did too, just about how these numbers come about, right? Because I think Yeah, I do remember filming that video with you, and I think everyone at that point was just fed up and ticked off,
Pissed.
and yeah, and
It's a 3-day
so,
red snapper season
yeah,
that
and
we were looking at.
yeah, and so yeah, so huge thanks to you for getting involved. I know you attend every meeting possible, and we have Travis Thompson's been on a couple of times too, and I know he's quite involved. And what are some other things that we, is assuming most people listening to this are recreational anglers, that we could be doing to just to further make this efficient and honest and just continually getting better every year? What else can we do?
So the big thing that you could do is get involved. And getting involved means different things for different people. So your average Joe angler who has a day job, who works 40 hours, has kids, doesn't have time to attend meetings. I get that. I'm not expecting you to get involved and join me and Travis at all these meetings and join our Florida Guides Association and help us fight the good fight. I understand not everybody has that opportunity, that time to be able to do it. Getting involved could simply mean sign up for an email list, join an email list. The Golf Council, the CDAR, Southeast Data Assessment Review, is how they do the stock assessments. So the CDAR website, the Golf Council website, NOAA Fisheries websites, they all have email newsletters and email lists that you can join. And a huge amount of information comes across those emails, especially the Golf Council. The Golf Council is awesome. The South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, if you're watching this video and you're in North Carolina or South Carolina, they have an email list as well. All the councils are very open, and each council actually has a position, and so does NOAA Fisheries, of what's called what do they call them? A PIO, Public Information Officer. So for Golf Council, it's Emily Muhlstein. For the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council, it's Kim Iverson. For NOAA Fisheries, it's Sean Meehan for the Southeast region. And they literally put their cell phone numbers out there for public use. I mean, literally, you could text Emily from the Golf Council or Kim at the South Atlantic Council questions, and they'll point you in the right direction. And I do it a lot. If something comes up and I'm like, what is this? I'll call Emily or Kim and I'll say, hey, this is a problem I have. Where do I go? And if they don't know, they'll call some people, they'll call me back and they'll put me in touch with someone. Like the whole rice whale thing that come out recently. Made a few calls to Sean Meehan at NOAA Fisheries. And the next day I was in a meeting with the head of whales for all of NOAA Fisheries and the top scientists. And they were literally taking an hour with me in a Zoom call like this to break down exactly all the information they had about Rice's whales. Wow. So a lot of these people are willing and able to help you get involved and help educate you. You just have to approach it and start to make some connections. So join an email list. If you have questions, contact myself through our social media or call the office here and I'd be happy to chat with you, or call the public information officers for the Golf Council, for the South Atlantic Council, for NOAA Fisheries. And I can send you a link after this is done that you can actually put their cell phones and the informations if you want in the podcast info.
Cool. That'd be awesome.
It's pretty, yeah. And also the email links. We could put the email links in the podcast info too. So if someone wanted to sign up for the emails, they could do that as well. But just reading some emails and then paying attention. If things are coming up, like what happens a lot that's frustrating to me is you'll have a regulation proposed in the council process. That proposed regulation goes through a draft paper, then it goes to a plan amendment, then it goes through public comment, then it goes through final rule. And literally, it can sometimes be a 2 or 3 year process to change a regulation in the council process because things move slowly. There's only 5 Gulf Council meetings a year. And a lot of times it only gets talked about every other meeting or every third meeting. Mm-hmm. So it can sometimes take 2 years to change a regulation. And then it takes 6 months, 12 months for that regulation to be submitted to NOAA Fisheries and NOAA Fisheries to actually make that a rule. So you'll hear about something coming, like, let's say they want to change the bag limit on gag grouper. And you'll hear about it. You'll hear rumors. They'll talk about it. It'll move to public comment. They'll ask for public comment. No one will comment on it. Then it'll go to final rule. they'll ask for public comment again. A few people comment on it, and then it'll make it a regulation. They'll pass it, they'll finalize it, they'll submit it to NOAA Fisheries for rulemaking. Then NOAA Fisheries takes 6-12 months to ask for public comment. Then they make it a rule, and it comes out in black and white. This is a rule. And people are like, what? What are you talking about? It's like, we've been talking about this for 3 years, man. Where were you in the beginning of the process? And that is something that you can avoid by joining these emails, because they're going to make you aware of things ahead of time. And even paying attention to the social media, right? Like the Gulf Council has a social media page, and unfortunately just don't read the comments, because some people are really poorly misled, or just, I don't know how to explain that nicely, but the comments are pretty outrageous sometimes. But they do a good job of communicating what's coming up, what's going on, and that kind of thing too. But getting involved, listening to emails, making some phone calls, talking to people is a big way to do it. We do a show every Sunday night where we answer questions and try to keep people up to abreast of what's going on. Listening to podcasts. I mean, you guys do a great job. Every time something is going on, like this gag grouper thing, I reach out to you guys, and you do a great job of letting me come on here and stand on my soapbox a little bit. So I appreciate it.
Oh, it's super helpful, man. And where can people go fish with you and your awesome company?
Well, we are Hubbard's Marina. We're located in Johns Pass in Central West Florida, and we've been doing it since 1928, and going on almost 100 years and 4 generations. We're blessed to continue to still be fishing federal waters, and I'm also the president of Florida Guides Association. So we have a huge number of guides across the state, whether you want to go inshore fishing, near shore fishing, offshore fishing. Florida-guides.com is going to be where you find our guide association members, and all those folks are heavily involved in this process, kind of helping us fight the good fight as well. So folks like Travis are in our Florida Guides Association. He's a board member. He's super involved as well. So big shout out to Captain Travis Thompson. No
doubt, both you guys.
A fellow Winter Haven resident.
That's right. Polk County, baby. Yeah, no, thanks to both you guys, because it and I'm on multiple of those email lists, and shame on me. You get so many of them sometimes, and it's just and life gets in the way, and you guys are just on top of it, and it takes a lot of work. I can only imagine how much of your year is taken up traveling and going to these meetings and reading all the emails and getting the public comment. But I think the coolest part is when this whole gag grouper thing happened, and I don't remember who it was, but it was someone on one of the councils was like, hey, here is the link to go submit your public comment. And then everyone's like, I'm not even gonna waste my time. You guys aren't going to read it. And so people, and the cool part is they did read it, and they actually are like potentially making some big changes because of all the public comments that came in the right way. So they will read it, and like your vote or your opinion does matter, but it has to be done the right way. Like go through. I mean, it was really neat to see that. And what I hated seeing was all those people. I mean, you said there's 300 something comments in 48 hours. There was more comments on Facebook than that in that short amount of time. And had just everyone gone and done it the right way, it could have been 1,000 comments in a really short amount of time. So.
Amen to that. And I mean, on the Gulf Council Facebook page, I talked about the comments earlier. There was one where the Gulf Council posted, hey, we need comments on this. NOAA Fisheries needs to hear from you about this gag grouper data. And I had like 400 comments on it. I don't know how many comments, but I had a lot of comments on it about like, gag grouper aren't in trouble, blah, 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 blah. And some really good comments. But the actual number of comments in the council public document, the public register that actually gets disseminated to the council members, no one had officially commented. So the council did another post kind of poking fun at this, like, guys, stop commenting on Facebook. Go to this link that we just shared with you and actually give comment. And you mentioned earlier, Ed Walker, Captain Ed Walker is from Tarpon Springs, kind of the heart of gag grouper country. And he's a council member. He's on the council. And he posted asking for comments, and the same thing happened to him. And he's like, guys, what do you mean? I'm the one on the council asking you for comments. Please click this link. Yeah. And it was pretty comical. So I'm glad to help hopefully be a part of people getting a little bit more involved and taking that extra step, because they don't read, or excuse me. A lot of people commented on Facebook like, oh, they don't care what we said. They don't read what we say anyway. A lot of the council members do read that stuff, but it's not public record. MSA, again, those guidelines that we talked about, one of the guidelines is public comment. And according to public record is huge. Building the record is something that is very important. We've seen it recently with multiple lawsuits. So if you have public comment that says, hey, this gag grouper data is wrong, you guys need to do something about this. Hey, this gag grouper data is wrong, you need to do something about this. And they don't, eventually you can file a lawsuit. And that public record is then shown as, hey, you guys have been asked multiple times by multiple members of the public to change this, and you guys have been ignoring public comment. And then again, MSA, the guidelines will force them to do it. So public record is hugely important, and building that public record through public comment is very, very, very vital.
No, that's awesome, man. Well, cool, brother. Well, thank you again. And this has been super helpful. I'm sure we'll have you on in the future, because there will inevitably be more issues like this where, people don't agree on all the regulations. But thank you again, brother. And I need to get out there and go fishing with you guys at Hubbard's. It's been a while.
Well, if you're too busy to go fishing, you're just too darn busy.
Oh, just waiting for it. What a layup.
Got it.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, man.
Guys, thank you all so much. If you have any questions, we do read your comments, so let us know down below. We'd love to hear from you, and anything that you didn't understand, or if you need clarification, or if you guys want us to do another podcast on any other type of species or anything else going out there in the ocean. Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you on the next episode.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.